Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a speedy round of applause? Let's welcome the co-founder and CTO of Graviky Labs, someone who's actually turning smog to inks, somebody who's making shoes that guide. I think, can we have a nice, encouraging round of applause? Everyone, Anirudh Sharma.
Hello, everyone. Still very jet lagged, just flew in from SF. So in next 10, 15 minutes, I'll take you on a journey that covers like 15 years of my life. Snapping back to 2010, I was a junior, like an assistant researcher at HP Labs in Bangalore. And on everyday commute to work, I used to see a lot of visually impaired people cross the roads, walk from one place to another, and live their life that they used to. And while one day I noticed that they used to have their smartphones in their hand, like everybody does, but couldn't use the turn-by-turn Google Maps navigation to walk from one place to another, right? This made me very curious. I spoke to one of them, and they said, we can't use because we cannot see the phone screen. And there is audio, but we use our sense of hearing to notice what is around us, make a spatial sense of direction outdoors. This made me very curious about how limiting the technology is when people are walking outdoors, especially when they're visually impaired. In India alone, there are 5 million blind people. And globally, like more than 50 million people are completely visually impaired, but they struggle in walking outdoors. I went back to my lab and built this very simple contraption with like $2 worth of material. So like there are 4 vibrators. The idea was, how do you guide people without them having to look on a smartphone from one place to another? So I built this shoe designed with north, south, east, west. Like if you see the rightmost diagram, that could basically condense the geo-navigational information into a sense that they can feel just through vibrations. This was an experiment like everybody does in the lab. I took this design back to the same blind people that actually gave this idea that, hey, what if the vibrations could guide us? And it started a series of iterative experiments, which meant like I would go back to them with this design, try it on them, then come back to my lab, fix it. I went back to my researcher at HP and my boss, and I said, hey, this is looking very useful. I'm getting good feedback. What do we do with this? He said, you'll have to quit your job, Anirudh, if you want to make shoes. Eventually, I did. We got a $2 million grant to develop this further. Did a few pilots with LV Prasad Institute of Blind. And later, the design evolved into an insole that now basically guides people from one place to another and can be embedded inside a shoe. This started as basically the big idea being that this started as a very simple observation on streets that you can do anywhere and turn it into an opportunity for innovation. Millions of dollars spent later and several pilots done. This product is now being used by more than 1 million people around the world for helping them guide from one place to another. After this, we started doing the same design we used to like start doing advanced gait analytics and helping elderly people from fall prevention and basically fall navigation. So this was 2010 still. Now the desire to like basically work with human senses and technology took me to MIT Media Lab. At Media Lab, I felt like being a kid in the candy store. It's a research lab at MIT where you actually work next to researchers from every different discipline in the same building. So on an everyday basis, you will walk into a neuroscientist. In the next building, you will probably walk into somebody who is a Hollywood creator, and that leads to a lot of collaboration between different disciplines. I started further series of experimentations with augmented and virtual reality. It's basically doing AI before AI was sexy. My first series of experiments at Media Lab were about how do we take everyday objects. Like right now, for everything that we need to do, there is physical world and there is digital world, which is your computer and phones. How do you blend this digital and physical world together? I took everyday objects, something as simple as a magnifying glass that every kid uses, and augment that with augmented reality. This is a very simple experiment. Can you play this video? Oh, I think uh, I think it's fine. This was another example where we took a ruler that you use to measure and draw objects and augmented with AI and augmented reality to see the physics of the physical world onto the paper itself. The idea was that why do we people need to go to computers to do like digital stuff? Why can't intelligence be augmented inside the everyday objects that people are already used to? So, for example, in this example, you just draw a ball, you say what is the gravity, what is the velocity, and then you see, like class 8th math, and then you see the physics happening on the paper itself. This idea was taken up, started as a small research project, and then eventually taken up by Samsung for their transparent display projects back in Boston, um, out of the lab. So a lot of people said that they would probably use something like this to like cheat in their exams. Like you draw a shape, and then you can see the physics happen on the paper. It can measure surface areas and so on. Now, while I'll show you this last prototype as well. So you draw this shape, and then you see what the area is right on the paper itself. That's being the idea of doing augmented reality fused with everyday objects. Now, I was in Boston probably 20 as a 25-year-old, and I realized I used to travel back and forth to India to meet parents. And one of these trips down to India, I was in a small town called Mathura. And I took this picture there. This picture is nothing, everybody has seen this, right? Like there is an exhaust somewhere and the walls are becoming black. If you walk outside this hall right now, Delhi's air quality is you're breathing in air that is 65 ppm of particulate matter. What that means is there are 6 to 700 particles in per meter square of area that you're breathing in. This leads to like long-term lung disorders, and this is basically fossil fuel emissions, what we call as pollution, what we call as smoke, and so on. It's a fundamental rule that whenever a fossil fuel will be burnt, you will produce carbon-based emissions. This was an observation I took this picture back in India, and I went back to Cambridge, to Boston, to MIT. And I went and sat together with my friends. He said, this is a very interesting picture because you see like smoke coming out of the exhaust. What do we do with this? Now, there was not much pollution back in Boston, so we said we need to create some. I started this, so in our room, we set up this very simple contraption. So it's basically volume a little lower. So we took this candle, and you see the same smog come out of candle. What do we do with this? We took some vegetable oil and some vodka, mixed it into this soot that is collected from carbon-based sources, and turn it into a very tiny printer. So what you see is this contraption that sucks in this carbon, this pollution that is coming off this candle, and pump some like vegetable oil and vodka because that's a very easily available chemical. Why vodka is because it kind of is alcohol that is used in making inks. Fit it into an ink cartridge, and then you're essentially able to print with pollution. Now, this might look fun as a lab project, right? Like it was very, very simple. I put it up on the internet, and the power of internet, it blew up. Like I got millions of views on this idea. And eventually, this led me to come back to India. I moved back because we were like, how do we actually address India's pollution problem? There was a great scientist called Buckminster Fuller who said, pollution is nothing but the resources we are not harvesting yet. This line is very powerful because if you see in nature, there is nothing called waste, right? Like there is nothing, a leaf falls down on the ground and becomes sand again, and then a tree comes out of it. There's nothing called waste. How do we kind of take the same learning from nature and build systems around that? So this system that I built eventually led to raising of money, and then we built these contraptions that we would fit behind like your cars, your diesel generators, and your trucks, and be able to collect this particulate matter in this form itself. Everybody, if you put your hand inside your exhaust, you will collect this stuff. Now, this is gross, it's really mucky, but if you see from a scientific perspective, 85 to 90% of this is really valuable carbon. And carbon is the building block of everything around us. We started collecting like from diesel generators to petrol SUVs to cars, these different samples of pollution in the same amount of time, and doing advanced studies on what is this particulate matter, what is its composition, and what can we do with it. The simplest idea that caught attention with people was, why don't you make inks around it? And what happens when you make inks? Ink is a wonderful medium of expression. You write with it, you paint with it, and print with it. From the lab, very soon, one of our earliest adopters were a huge community of artists around the world who started using this ink to do this pollution. So we started collecting pollution in India and exporting it to European countries for doing art on the streets. This was an art piece sponsored by Heineken, put up in Piccadilly Circus in London, and soon around the world, millions of artworks started emerging. So we would make inks by captured pollution, and then thousands of people would like make artwork with it. What would it do with it? How would we make money from it? Like, right? We were having a lot of fun. The idea became more popular, and we set up a little warehouse outside of Delhi, where several polluters from around the world would ship us this pollution captured from different chimneys and say, we don't know what to do with it, why don't you take it from us? So it was basically like free pollution coming to us, and we set up this system that, hey, pollution in and inks out. So we would transform it into different forms of inks and pigments and then further export them back to the Western countries, where most of the pollution anyway comes from. So this idea eventually transformed into something that now tons of brands use. This is a brand of Johnnie Walker, like, of course, a whiskey brand. Whiskey is known to be an extremely polluting production process. They launched like a brand of Johnnie Walker Black Labels, where all the ink on the surface is actually the pollution captured in India. Same idea, started on the streets with an observation, now becoming a thing that people using around the world. Then we made screen printing inks that went onto fabrics. Fabric industry has a lot of pressure to be sustainable and to look sustainable. And we made these different inks that would go on fabrics, and Naomi Campbell and a lot of like Western brands started launching these lines of clothing that, hey, this fabric is made by printing carbon emission, by recycling air pollution and turning it into useful products. The same example would be MasterCard. Like if you see all the black color on this, MasterCard is actually air ink, and it says on the label, the brand air ink. We kept the brand alive and started licensing it to large, big companies to look less unsustainable and offset their carbon credits. So what happens when we move air ink, when we do air ink, when we recycle pollution into useful products? One is it removes the emissions from the air, from the atmosphere that otherwise you would have breathed in, that would have gone into your everyday environments. And if you don't know this, most of the black color, which is probably this mic is made of black color, my shirt is, my jacket is black color, everything around you, mostly that car is painted in black. It is made by deliberately burning fossil fuels. So there's a factory somewhere sitting that is burning fossil fuels to produce this black color. And our concept was, you don't need to do that because there's tons of pollution already around us. If you can recycle it into useful materials, you can actually replace that black color with this pollution essentially. After this business was set, I started another fork of experiments that, hey, pollution is one thing. What if you start looking at CO2? Now, CO2 is an extremely stable molecule. Like we breathe out CO2. Factory emissions produce CO2. But what if we create a reactor that can take in CO2 and water from the atmosphere and turn it into fuels? We set up a small lab and created this experiment which would turn CO2 into early forms of ethanol. So here's a small short, and this won the Time Best Inventions of 2020. I'll just show you a very quick demo of like what this invention kind of looked like. Volume up. What if we could tap into it? That's how we made air ink, which was soon adopted by a global community of artists around the world. Over a period of time, air ink started making its way into replacing conventional inks on a scale much bigger than we ever imagined. Industries who had already adopted air ink told us that, hey, can we make other important materials out of thin air? The idea was to go beyond printing and become the core material itself.
We took an inspiration from how a tree has been doing CO2 sequestration and upcycling for millions of years. What if we can use this CO2 that is in the air as a feedstock to replace petrochemicals?
Conventionally, carbon capture is done using high temperature and pressures. AirSynth has been developed to upcycle ambient carbon dioxide and humidity into oxygen and valuable chemicals. This is radically different from any carbon capture technology in the world.
Like a cathode and an anode and some catalyst in it, and that's the secret sauce that enables carbon capture. It's the simplicity with which electrochemistry enables directly turning carbon dioxide into products of use.
Essentially, the way that you've been doing manufacturing for the past 250 years, you ended up releasing huge amounts of carbon emissions, essentially capturing CO2 and converting it into useful petrochemicals like ethylene, ethanol. You are making materials out of air.
Can we develop these solutions that assist climate change action in an affordable way, in a modular way that allows at different scales of usage, in a way that products can be made for people in a way that they need?
We'd love to see this open community grow where industries and product makers of tomorrow collaborate to decarbonize the world around us. Climate change is going to be like a 100-year-long pandemic. As long as there is sun and greenhouse gases meet in a desert or a big city, we can mine the thin air for new materials, just like magic. I think the audio wasn't that clear. So what we did was, if you imagine a desert in Rajasthan, you see nothing there, right? But actually, from an electrochemistry perspective, there's CO2 in the air, and then there are small amounts of water vapor. So we put this reactor in the middle of a desert and started capturing CO2 and small amounts of humidity to turn CO2 in from the atmosphere into small amounts of ethanol. And if you see, ethanol right now is used in like for your fuels into the car. So there's this big research project going on in California right now, where the new forms of industries are looking at how do we make ethanol from beyond sugar canes, from beyond sugars and so on, because our environment already has that CO2 that is required to make new forms of fuel. So I'll end my presentation with this one. The big lesson for me, the biggest learning lesson from me, and probably something to take back would be, if you observe around yourself, there are these amazing, huge problems that if you apply science to, can become a wonderful source of new revenue streams and new solutions that can address the real world problems. Thank you so much.